Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's debate. How will elections in the USA and Germany next year change the EMS landscape? Offshoring and reshoring are driven by, among other things, taxes, environmental legislation, logistics and proximity to the end user. How will the upcoming elections in the USA and Germany and the impending Brexit in the United Kingdom affect the electronics manufacturing industry, and who will benefit and why? Joining me today, we have an esteemed panel of global experts who do business around the world and who have a lot of input into what goes on in our industry. So I'm joined from left to right. We have John Hasselman, who is Head of Government Relations for the IPC. To his right, we have Volker Papp from Viscom in Germany. To my immediate right, we have Bob Black from Juki Corporation, which is the president of Juki Japan, from Smart Group and Smart Loop. So welcome, gentlemen. And I'm going to start with a couple of initial questions, and then we'll open up the debate to a wider discussion. So starting with you, Bob, the automotive industry and industrial automation have been a large part of the US EMS industry since the offshoring of consumer manufacturing to Asia. What effect is the recent migration to Mexico having on the American electronics industry?
Well, it's definitely reducing the number of people employed in the United States doing those jobs when factories are closed and relocated to Mexico. But I haven't seen a real lemmings rush as in the China migration of 10 or 15 years ago. A lot of companies are remaining here, and a couple of new facilities have opened recently. So I don't think it's any reason for panic yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You know, I mean, some people would say that you know, some of these companies that have moved south have moved for different reasons. I mean, for example, Toyota and Audi are manufacturing in Mexico because Mexico's got a free trade agreement with Europe and Japan and its South American neighbors. So if it builds a car, it's not just building for the US, it's building for the global market, and it doesn't have to pay tariffs on shipping to Europe.
Yeah, well, that's there are always good and bad reasons to leave, and that's probably one of the good ones.
Right. Okay. So, Volker, Germany's been more fortunate than most in retaining a lot of its manufacturing base. Do you see that continuing, and how will the upcoming elections, I think the next year, how will they affect that?
Actually, I have to correct you a little bit. There's two sides of the medal.
Right.
We have a lot of production retained in terms of high-end manufacturing, like automotive and stuff like that, and supply to automotive. But we lost a lot of productions which have been, especially in the mass electronics, like TV, like cell phones. Germany, there's nothing. Nevertheless, we are very strong in industrial and engineering and machinery, and this reflects also that Germany is very strong in exporting this machinery to the world. And I think this this industry is retaining even a bigger change in the following and upcoming elections. So I think this industry is strong by itself, and from its quality, it's demanded by a lot of companies in the world, and so that will not affect, the elections will not affect this industry too much, is my guess. Right. I think the long-term development of how labor costs can up on a relatively acceptable height in Germany is the more interesting issue, and this doesn't depend on the government but on some other developments.
Some other developments. So more automation is going to help them.
Yes, okay. Sure.
Yeah. Okay, Keith, the upcoming Brexit vote in the UK is looking very close. Do you think British manufacturing can survive outside of the European Union?
Well, I think, yes, it can definitely survive. I think you're right, the vote is very close. A lot of people that I've been speaking to over the last few weeks actually think it's moving in terms of a leaving vote. And there's even a few comments that the British Prime Minister would like to see us leave. And he actually went to Brussels with a lot of demands that he knew he wasn't going to get met.
Right.
And now he's kind of come back to the country and said, well, guys, I'm really sorry. This is what I wanted, but I haven't got it.
Right.
And this kind of sets an expectation for quite a few people that, maybe if we'd got all the things we asked for, we'd stay, but now we haven't got them, so perhaps we'd be better off outside.
Right.
We'll obviously have the instant import duty if we leave from France, because that's just the thing with England and France. But I think the more enlightened countries will carry on with a trade agreement of some type, and UK is a net contributor to Europe of quite a large amount of money, which is a large amount of money per person when you look at the size of people. And as long as that's put into inward investment to improve the high-end manufacturing potential that we have left, then
Right.
I think it's going to be good. Like most people, we've already lost the what Olga referred to as the mass manufacturing.
Right.
So we have new product introduction, we have high-end things, and we have stuff for our own consumption.
But electronics manufacturing actually makes up quite a big part of the EU economy, if you look at the government numbers.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is from what I will describe as the developing EU countries, because that's where the lowest cost manufacturer is. It's
Right.
the same debate as the US-Mexico debate.
Yeah.
Romania is growing hugely. A lot of the other countries that were previous Soviet bloc are growing dramatically because they have a good skilled workforce, and they have nice, well-trained people, and very low cost of labor,
Right.
low cost of overheads, and that's going to be the future of European volume manufacturing.
Right.
In fact, a lot of manufacturing is coming back from Asia into those areas.
Yeah. How do you think the EU, the Britain leaving the EU, is going to affect Germany? I mean, you guys are going to have to do a lot more heavy lifting.
Yeah, actually, it's hard to say, but I don't care.
Well, that's actually good to know.
Yeah, no, honestly, I love Great Britain as a country. I've been there with 14 years for half a year or so. It was a great time I had. But on the other hand, the EC will continue whether Great Britain is part of it or not, or the UK is part of it or not. I'm not sure whether the development leaving the community is good for the UK, on the other side, because at least for a certain amount it's standing alone and has to find a kind of new networking. So I'm in doubt whether it's good for Britain. On the other hand, what I would agree to is that Eastern Europe is the area where the production has gone, but Germany, Western Europe at all has lost a lot of that stuff, and so these are for German machinery the important countries.
Okay. All right. John, IPC has recently opened an office in Brussels to help be closer to European legislation and that type of thing. You also have, of course, an office in Washington where you're based, and you've done some good work there, which we can talk about later. But in light of today's politics and of course the recent elections, do you think a Trump presidency would make your job easier or harder?
Very interesting. I think, well, first of all, we are a bipartisan organization.
Okay.
And we do not support presidential candidates, but we do work with Republicans and Democrats on a host of issues. And a lot of the issues that we work on are not polarizing issues, and not Democrat or Republican. And so, it's how we get there. So if it's a Trump administration or a Clinton administration, a Sanders administration, or a Cruz administration, we're going to be able to work with them. We have a lot of members in every continental state in the U.S. They're constituents, they're good jobs, and they're going to want to work with us.
Right. Okay. I mean, Trump has obviously taken the Republican primary race by storm. His views on many topics are controversial, but his views on trade in particular would have a big effect on the EMS manufacturing industry, both for the indigenous market and the export market. How do you think that's going to, how do you think that would affect us?
Well, I think that we have a problem. We have a huge trade deficit with China. It's growing. There have been attempts and good faith efforts by China to reduce it, but it hasn't been reduced. And that can't be sustainable over a long period of time. And I think what Trump is saying, in maybe a little more loud way, is that we haven't done a good job in the United States of negotiating the trade position versus China. And I think what he's saying to China with his 45% tariff threat is, you better come to the table and we better agree on a better deal for the United States, or I'm going to have to do something.
Right.
And that said, I don't think he's going to blow up the world over it. But it is something that has to be addressed, and the fault, I think, lies with the Obama administration, the Bush administration before it, for not doing something about it and for pushing it down the road, which politicians often do. Mm-hmm. So it's something that needs to be addressed, and if he's willing to address it, I think you see the response of the public that they agree with that.
Right. So you think he's using it purely as a bargaining chip?
Look, he's a real estate guy.
Right.
He's used to negotiating business deals all over the world with all kinds of governments and countries and people. He's a negotiator. Mm-hmm. He's putting out his starting position. That doesn't mean that's his finishing position.
Right.
Right. So I think, he's an intelligent man. You may like him, you may not like him. He's a businessman. He wants to get a deal done, and he'll meet somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anybody else in the panel have views or thoughts on it? You're all mostly on the outside of it, with the exception of John here, but he's bipartisan, as he's already stated.
Yeah, well, Trevor, from a purely outsider's point of view, looking at it, we find it a very interesting thing to be happening. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a groundswell reaction almost against what I would describe as the traditional politician. And we're seeing something similar in a few places in Europe as well. We have in the UK traditionally what I would describe as career politicians. Mm-hmm. They go to university, they join the party of their choice as a researcher, mm-hmm. and then they get a small seat somewhere and they work their way up. But they don't actually have what Donald Trump has, and what Bob put so eloquently is, they don't have a business background. They're not commercial people. Right. And yet they're negotiating on behalf of our country. Right. And really, it doesn't get much bigger than that. Yeah. And I know also in the US, there's something with the lobby groups, which we're also seeing a little bit in Europe now, especially within the EU. And the thing that I remember hearing from Donald Trump when he was interviewed, when he announced pretty much he was going to run, was the lobby groups better get a little bit worried because I don't need their money.
Right.
And I don't need their money now, and I won't need their money when I'm in power. And I think a lot of people believe that the lobby groups have a huge amount of power in what happens. And basically Trump's saying, if I'm in, they don't have that power anymore.
That's very true. I think everybody is saying that, Washington is broken, essentially. There's not enough legislation getting passed. Everything's at a gridlock. And so this is really a demonstration against the establishment.
Yeah, exactly. I want to agree to that in the extent that in Germany we have the similar situation in the background. The outcome is a little bit different. We have this AfD party, which is a kind of popularism party, growing in especially Eastern Germany, where the people are still somewhat insecure about the political system. And the background is the same thing in its basic. It's the tiredness of the traditional political system with the professional politicians, and that's I think something which you find in Germany, in the US, and in some other spots of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, John, you've managed to achieve a few things like in Washington on behalf of the industry, including the retaining the industry tax credit. How did you manage that? How did you negotiate that?
Well, it's definitely, I always say our members are our fiercest advocates. Mm-hmm. I mean, when our members come to Washington like Bob does, and he can actually articulate a real-world situation that applies to the legislation and how it will impact him and his business and his workers. That his 48 hours in Washington helps me do my job the rest of the year. And so if I can get 30 Bob Blacks to come to Washington, and our next one is in is April, this next month.
Okay.
We hope to keep pushing the envelope on some of these issues like tax reform, TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, where a lot of our industry is really impacted by. We continue to build relationships. We instituted a program called Meet Your Policymaker, where we have orchestrated over 30 visits by members of Congress to IPC member facilities around the U.S. And we'd like to replicate that in different areas, in different markets as well. We had some Chinese officials come to some of our members in China. Now that we're opening up, we have our office in Brussels. We want to do something, maybe bring some members of parliament into, to some of our facilities in some of the member states in the EU. So I think there's a lot of opportunity still, and we've had some success, but we're really just beginning in my mind.
Right. Okay.
May I add on something? I'm representing the VDMA, which is a kind of German association, and what you said is 100% what they do. They have a team of professionals supported by their members. One of them is me. And with that, you can transfer the real life problems to the politics and to the responsible persons and to give them a real picture. And that is what Bob is doing over here, and guys like Bob are doing over here, and we try to do the same thing in Germany and Europe. And on the other hand, you have to be, in a way, neutral. You have to say your opinion, but you have to talk to all of them which are responsible. Don't care which party is behind it or whatever, you have to talk to them all. And this is very important because it's a democracy and the positions change, so you have to talk to them all and cooperate with them all.
Yeah, and I just to comment, I think that lobbying, the word lobbying, as you brought up earlier, has a bad name. There is good lobbying and there's bad lobbying. And I think the good lobbying is this type of where you try to educate people about the industry, what's necessary. There's not a large amount of money involved. It's time invested and so forth. I think what the public is fed up with is these large dollar contributions behind the scenes by organizations and individuals to try to influence legislation for their own benefit. And, look at today. I mean, Hillary Clinton was supposed to walk into the Democratic nomination and be crowned. She's had a little fight with Mr. Sanders, a socialist who one would think on the surface wouldn't have much of a chance. But he's done very well because people in the Democratic side are also fed up with the normal way of doing things, and they saw him as a channel to open up the government and express things. On the Republican side, that's the result for Trump. Now, Trump is a little bit of a loudmouth, let's face it, and certainly he doesn't mind being on the television. But, he's right in one thing. He's tapped into this anger that the public has, that you elect and send people to Washington to make changes and clean things up, and they get there and all of a sudden they forget totally what they promised during the campaign, and they fall in line with everybody else and start lining their own pockets and looking towards their re-election. And so I see, in this primary vote, I see people saying enough of that. This guy wants to go there and blow things up and put things right. We're going to give him a chance. And that's what you're seeing in a large part from both sides of the aisle, why people are reacting this way.
Okay. Yeah, no, certainly it's a reaction. I mean, people are fed up with the gridlock in Washington. But coming back to your just comments earlier, Bob, about negotiating power, and in particular China. The Chinese government has poured millions of dollars into developing the latest fabs and acquiring minerals and rare earth metals. You may remember the famous fishing incident in Japan a couple of years ago. So are they holding the ace cards when it comes to any impending negotiation?
Absolutely not. The Chinese have a lot of advantages. They have a big population of good workers at a younger age, certainly than many other societies in the West. They've gotten a lot of industry located in China. They've strengthened their educational system, so they have an educated workforce. But they need markets to sell the products they produce with those advantages. And the biggest market in the world is still the United States. The second biggest, perhaps, is the European Union. And so they can't just walk over those countries and get everything they want. They need to sit down at the table and make reasonable agreements. And if they don't, if it became unpopular to buy Chinese products, their economy would suffer very quickly. And so they have to cooperate and meet in the middle as everybody else does.
Right.
So they hold cards, but they don't hold all the cards.
Right. Okay. Well, one of the things that a lot of the candidates have been in the U.S. have been talking about is immigration. Immigration from Mexico, and even immigration accepting people from the Middle East into the United States, partly for security reasons, partly and this type of thing, and to make sure they're legal. Germany's gone a little bit the other way by allowing a large influx, some would say a migration of Syrians into the country. And if you look at other patterns of where large numbers of people have come into countries in the past, it's resulted in more productivity with these people learning jobs and this type of thing. But there are obviously considerable security risks with this situation in Syria. How are most Germans handling this?
Well, actually, this situation is crucial somewhat. Germany has a history, and from this history, the decision was made in earlier years to make an open country, to let refugees in and give them a chance. But nobody calculated that there would be coming millions and millions of people at the same time.
Right.
That's one point. And the other point is that Germany is bound very tight in this network of the European community. And actually, the open behavior of Germany is not accepted by other partners in this community, which leads to some cracks in the system already. You notice that? So actually, I wouldn't say I have a solution to that. That would be too easy. But I think we have to get along with this fact that people are coming.
Yeah.
We have to handle this fact that these people are, to a big amount, really refugees. We have to handle with the fact that some of these people are economic refugees, or even people who join into this stream as with some completely different interests. And we have to intensify our security measures in Germany and in the European community to find out these specific spots. Nevertheless, we were never that strict and rigid in the European community as the US have been in the past with incoming people. And so the risk we had in whole Europe was much higher that we let people in which are coming with a bad mind.
Right.
So the point we have to deal with is the big amount of people coming now, and leave out the terrorists. We have to handle them at all. But the point which is giving the big problem now is how to handle these guys. And there are voices saying we have to take all the money we give to Greece, I say it simplified, take it back and put it into the education of these people and refugees to build workforce, to make maybe even low-cost workforce in Germany to enable the industry to make better and more intense production. This is another saying. I wouldn't say that's simple.
Right.
But there's a lot of points you can discuss about. These people are there, and at the time we feed them, we should enable them to feed themselves.
Yeah.
That's what we should
It's going
do.
to be a big issue.
It will be,
to
yes.
educate
And
them,
there's no solution
integrate
at
them.
hand, which you just drop out.
And it's going to look like you might get borders coming back in Europe.
Yes,
to stop them spreading across
And this
Europe.
is, personally for me, is the worst thing we could do, because that was something I enjoyed. I personally have exported things to the UK, for example, had to cross 5 borders and had to present things to the customer at every single border and deal with bad guys and good guys on this customs. And I enjoyed the moment when that was open and I could drive through with all the stuff I had in my car. Yeah? So I really personally wish that this situation will not to close borders continuously. Maybe at a certain amount of time, but in the long term. Imagine the U.S. would have customs controls between California and what is next, Nevada. So
Rob's home state.
that's bad.
Yeah, it is a huge problem, you know, and I think Trump's idea here in the U.S. is to create safe zones for Syrians in Syria and try to keep them there until they but allow obviously legal immigration going forward when you have more time to vet them.
Yeah, the United States comes at this from a particular perspective, and that most other countries have not experienced a 9/11, when thousands of people were killed and some of our landmark buildings were destroyed in a single day. We have allowed this problem to grow to the point where it's gotten out of control, and we are one of, I think, the only countries that has no idea how many foreign people are in our borders or not. I know when I go to Japan, they know when I come in, and if I don't go out within my 90 days, I'm sure somebody will be looking for me. In the United States, that will never happen. So I understand the situation. I think Trump wants to secure the border, and he wants to have an orderly immigration system. Now, I don't think he's anti-immigration, right? We'll see. For me, right now I think our quota for people from Mexico to come into the U.S. is several 100,000 a year. If they want to make it 1 million, they want to make it 2 million, fine. Have them come in legally, have proper identification. If they want to work, have the proper work permits, pay the taxes, not get low wages under the legal amount, be paid like anybody else, not have to sneak around in the shadows and worry if there's an ICE policeman looking for them around the next corner. I think this is logical, and the United States was built by immigrants. I mean, all of my great-grandparents immigrated to the U.S. None of them were born here. So I think immigration is important to continue in the U.S., but it needs to be done in the right way and under control.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that goes for Europe within the Union or not within the Union. The problem is, as Anna said, there is a huge influx into a lot of countries, and it's swamped the health systems, it's swamped hospitals, it's swamped housing, it's swamped everything.
Yeah.
And it's just very hard. And the problem we have as well is the same as Bob. It's very hard to quantify, especially if you look at from Turkey to Greece. We have a large camp of people called the Jungle on Calais, and their full-time occupation is trying to get into the UK.
Yeah.
And when they're there, they just disappear into the system with friends, relations, or whatever, and they don't form part of our system, part of our structure, but they're there in some way, shape, or form, and occasionally demanding their rights for housing and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I think, I have to say probably everyone sat here, and I know most of the people that I talk to are not anti-immigration, but what they have a problem with is the scale that everything's happening and the damage it's doing to the whole thing. I mean, when we saw the things like that happened in Germany over the New Year, I mean that sent a shockwave through Germany, but it sent it through the rest of Europe as well.
Right.
Because amongst these people that come over, there seem to be groups of people who have no aim of working legally, and they will get money through whatever means they can, and they're not part of our system, so it's very hard to go find them. You catch them on a CCTV camera, but they don't have an ID card, so there's no picture. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, no, obviously, so I think everybody wants controlled immigration, that's for sure. But going back to what I said earlier, Trump's idea was to he said that a lot of these people would prefer actually to stay in their own country. They just don't feel safe in their own country. And therefore the answer might be to create a safe zone if there was going to be some sort of use of military. create a safe zone so that once the troubles were over, they could go back to their own homes.
Well, that would be a great solution if it's possible, but I don't think the problems in Syria are going to be solved that easily anytime soon.
Yeah.
And I think the Western countries have a great reticence to send military in to enforce that. So without that, it's not going to work. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, if you were to try and set them up, it's effectively what's been happening in some countries with the UK, where they went into Helmand for a while, and they tried to make that a safe zone for other people to come into, and then it becomes the number one target for the whole of the opposition for that reason.
Right.
And then, it becomes a war zone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gentlemen, I think we're running out of time. I want to thank you all for a great debate today. Obviously, this is going to be an ongoing debate, and the results of the elections we will wait to see. I want to thank my panelists, Keith Bryant from Smart Group, Bob Black from Juki Corporation, Volker Papp from Viscom, and of course John Hasselman from IPC, Global Government Relations. Thank you very much, and good evening.